Okay, I think it's about time we just dive right into it. My name is James Yacou. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of African and African American Studies here at the University of Kansas. It's my delight to welcome you again. Thanks for joining us yesterday. We had a great, amazing session. The keynote speakers, Dr. Kim Gallon and Esther Ama of the Ama Institute for Emotional Justice, offered a great presentation, and it was focused on the state and stolen project, and that was really nice. Today we have lined up a group of exciting panelists that will speak to different aspects of storytelling, and we're looking forward to hearing them and just continue the conversation. I just want to take a moment to welcome you and just thank you for joining us yet again. I'll turn it now to Kellen, who will introduce the speakers and get us started. Welcome.
Hi, so I'm here to introduce Ainihi Edoro from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with Brittle Paper, presenting Achebe, etc., building a literary archive, one Instagram post at a time. Welcome, Ainihi.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Kayleen. Thanks for inviting me to take part in this event. It's lovely to be in this group of scholars thinking about African literature within the digital sphere. Much of what I'm going to talk about today is, first of all, let me share my screen. Okay, so much of what I'm going to talk about today comes from my work as the editor of Brittle Paper. Brittle Paper is an online platform where we create digital content on African storytelling. In addition to the website, we have various social media channels. And over the years, I have been able to observe the differences in what we do on these different spaces. It's all African literature, but on each platform, whether it's website, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, each platform demands a different approach to the discourse. And observing and studying these differences has led me to a sense of what is characteristic of a social media African literary archive, as opposed to, say, a traditional literary corpus, where a corpus means a complete collection of documents, or at least a collection that aspires towards some kind of completion. My presentation is centered on a campaign we ran in November 2019. And instead of using the stills I got from Instagram, I am just going to take you to the actual Instagram page so that you can kind of see for yourself. Okay, there. And that if we started, it took us, it's a pretty small campaign, it was done to commemorate Achebe's birthday. Compared to the other campaigns that we do, it's actually quite small. It's run for 1 week, hence the name, the hashtag Achebe Week. And just for a bit of background, a campaign is a pretty common archival machinery on Instagram. You create a hashtag, and a very specific length of time, you post a curated collection of items under the hashtag. Over our various channels, so social media, Twitter and Facebook, including the website, we created about 120 pieces of content. a mix of text, photographs, and videos. And for Instagram specifically, we started with this post that shows you, that just shows us that imagines somebody having a dinner with Achebe. But as you go on, it becomes a very miscellaneous, heterogeneous post that includes a video clip from the HBO show Watchmen, where a character actually talks about reading Things Fall Apart. And then it includes just a regular tile post. So this is a kind of post that is made up of fragments, right? You can tell it has a very, it's literally broken up pieces that is put together to create a kind of tile or image. And then it also included a quiz, and it included a quote from Chimamanda. And this cute little piece we did a long time ago on brittle paper, where we have a fictitious agony aunt respond to people's queries about African literature. And this particular one was, "Dear Miss Paper, can I dump him for not knowing who Achebe is?" And then to finish off the campaign, we put together the 61 translations of Things Fall Apart, the cover art for all 61 translations of Things Fall Apart. And so if you click on each image, you will see a carousel of the covers for each text. And so it turned out to be a very, just very mixed and chaotic collection of little tiny things that constitute some type of collection about Achebe's work, Achebe's life, and people's response to it. Hold on, let me just move back to my PowerPoint. And so what I want to talk about is essentially what this kind of collection tells us about how ideas organize documents and place them in circulation within social media, right? What do they tell us about social media as an archival machinery? So where you say, I'm going to do a collection, I'm going to think about Achebe, but I'm going to amass a collection of documents that ranges from a photo of a dinner table, a quiz, an agony aunt letter, something that covers the range of pop culture, love and romance, celebrity, and things like that. Now, many of us think of social media as this place where we post cute wedding photos, share opinions on urgent issues, stay up on cultural trends, and get behind causes we care about. Now, social media is all of that, but it is also a powerful instrument of cultural knowledge making. It is a place where we make things in a very basic level, where you go, you write a tweet, or you create a photo on Instagram, you put a filter on it, and you post it. But social media is also a place where things can gather around an idea. And that's kind of the part that interests me most. Think of the Black Lives Matter hashtag and the 47 million times it was used on Twitter in 2 months to gather a vast body of media objects tied to the killing of George Floyd and the call for social justice. Social media is also a space where things circulate, in the sense that it grants visibility to things. Now, the idea of creating reproducible media objects in a place where they can be consigned or gathered, to use Derrida's term, and circulate tells us that we are fully in the realm of the archive, in the Derridian sense. When an Instagram user takes a photo of Achebe's Things Fall Apart, writes a caption about how she loves it, and posts the content, she has contributed to the expansive catalog of texts and images about African literature on Instagram. Now, there are currently 15,600 Chinua Achebe hashtags on Instagram. It may not seem to be much compared to the 2.4 million of Shakespeare, but each time the hashtag is used indicates a moment in which Achebe's text his name, or his idea is used to organize or gather together a diverse body of information. But I'm interested in the kinds of collections that constitute this archival operation. What kind of documents does it assemble, and what rules govern its operation? The first thing to consider in configuring a social media archive of African literature is that it's going to be an archive of small things. And that's what we do when we curate African literature on social media, that it's an archive of small things. We're not going to find books, films, collections of letters. And I'm thinking about books as a technology or form. I'm not thinking about discourse on books, books literally. And the principles of gathering these documents will not be grand histories and genealogies, treatises and arguments, epic stories of origin and evolution, and the history of the African novel, the survey of the Nigerian poetry, things like that. We're not going to find things like that there. David Cole, a prominent Silicon Valley figure, notes that social media platforms are built on a basic unit of content. Tweet on Twitter, for instance, right, is the smallest bit of, complete content that exists on Twitter. A good social media content is fairly short and distinct. Social media is a space where little things gather: a tweet, an Instagram post, a meme, a 15-second TikTok video, emojis, hashtags, like icons, and so on. So an African literary archive on social media thus consists in little things. Now, the smallness of the social media object ties into another key attribute of the archival system, which is miscellany. On March 2018, Chimamanda Adichie posted a video. She posted a video of herself dancing. It's a 7-second video. I'm going to play it quickly. That's it. To date, the video has garnered about 150,000 views. Okay. Now, 30 years ago, there is no context on which a video of Shoinka dancing in 7-second loops will be in circulation, not to mention being considered to be part of the literary discourse. But today, it turns out that the image of the dancing African writer is quite a common occurrence on social media. Akwaeke Emezi has a robust collection of dancing videos. The Congolese novelist and scholar Alain Mabankou dances too, while he's not, when he's not giving cooking tutorials. These videos are not terribly interesting in themselves, but they are significant when we consider that they circulate along the same routes as do other recognizably literary content, like book reviews, book announcements, book author interviews, photos from literary festivals, videos of writing, workshops, and things like that, right? So for instance, the next video after Adichie's dance is a video of her talking about Pen America and the collaboration she was doing with Pen America and a jewelry company, right? So these kinds of content may not be literary in a pure sense, but they share space with literature. And precisely because of that, they miscellanize the traditional literary corpus, which is designed to make literature legible in its completeness, in the sovereignty of its boundaries. Now, Derrida reminds us that an archive is not merely a place. It is a form of power. The power to establish a unifying space where things can assemble by showing what they have in common. The difference with archives on social media is that they bring together things that Derrida might consider too dissociative or too heterogeneous. So things like, for example, Mona El-Tahawi's plan to dye her hair the colors of the rainbow, which she posts alongside videos of her giving lectures or reflections on patriarchy and feminism, right? Nnedi Okorafor's Kat, right? Who actually also has a Twitter account itself and talks about her and sometimes talks about her writing, right? Okay, Indibe's amazing love story that he's chronicled beautifully on social media. And Akwaeke Emezi's house that actually has its own Instagram account. I think that what does all this have to do with literature? A lot, I would say. Safia Elilo's wedding photos may not tell us a lot about Sudanese American poetry, but it falls within African literary discourse as it exists on social media. The fragmented nature of social media content makes it such that things can be pulled together simply by virtue of existing contiguously within the same context with things that we imagine as literary. The old ways of creating corpuses by establishing and then policing the distinction between significant and non-significant is not at work here. Instead of a traditional literary archive that includes everything, or at least aspires to include everything we deem significant, a social media archive perpetually gestures towards the etc. That there is always an immense number of other things that could be considered literary. Book reviews, yes, but also birthday shout outs and pregnancy photos. Configuring this sort of archive is governed by what Umberto Eco calls the poetics of the etc., meaning that it involves fragments instead of connections, right? We're always thinking in terms of tiny little bits of things, miscellany instead of order, in the sense that we're always thinking of an archive that is open enough to take book reviews, but also to take wedding photos. Excess instead of constraint, in the sense that we are driven to create this archive into something astronomical and large. And lastly, ecstasy instead of authority, because these archives, many times we build them just from the sheer love of collecting things. Accounting for African literature on social media means making space for an expansive collection of media objects that capture a miscellany of cultural moments and artifacts. One where, in the terms of Eco, we do not always know the boundaries of what we wish to assemble, where we do not know how many things we are talking about, and presume their numbers, if not infinite, then at least astronomically large. Of quote. The version of the African Literary Archive as it exists on social media is an etc. archive, one that we build in bits and pieces, but that is also one that allows us to continually reconfigure the literary world by bringing out new relationship between very distant things. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Adoro. Wonderful. So exciting to think about a completely different way of collecting and archives and social media as a way of expanding the archives as opposed to the physical archives, which is always this restrictive nature of collecting and collecting policies. So we will take questions at the end. So we're going to move right on to our next talk with Jayne Batzofin from the Reimagining Tragedy in Africa and the Global South ReTags project from South Africa, and Dr. Sanjin Muftic from digital scholarship specialist at Cape Town, presenting the archive as Storyteller.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kaylin, for the introduction and for pronouncing our surnames so well. It doesn't happen often. Sanjin's just setting up our screen as I do our introduction. Thank you so much to James for inviting us to talk at the symposium. And yesterday was so inspiring and so wonderful that this platform is available to us. Sanjin and myself are both theatrical-minded people, but we're not performers. We're very much directors. So we've decided to put a presentation together for you and let that speak on our behalf. So I guess I want to say sit back and relax and enjoy the story. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you to the Department of African Studies at the University of Kansas for inviting us to present at the Symposium on African Digital Storytelling. My name is Jayne Batzofin. I'm a South African theatre director and designer by study and profession. I love creating worlds and stories on stage. I'm also a relatively newcomer to the world of digital archiving.
And I am Sanjin Muftic, working as a digital scholarship specialist at Digital Library Services at the University of Cape Town. I come from a theatre and computer sciences background and have always been interested in how the two might intersect.
Theatre in South Africa is deeply entrenched in the art of storytelling, from the traditions of African oral histories through to bodies presenting narratives in contemporary performance spaces. We live, speak, and move our stories in our embodied performance practices. The theatrical space is a place of flow and exchange, a transformation of bodies into images, of text into sound, of movements into emotion. Often South African theatre makers and academics focus on the output of the theatre production, rather than the process of the theatre making as the source for critique. Today we will be presenting our work on the importance and need for African theatre practitioners to be engaging in the ways in which they document, archive, and showcase their work, in order to share, expand, and centralize their stories for both academic and artistic development. While doing this, we will also be examining the narratives generated when we move away from the notion of the archive as source towards the archive as subject. ReTags, which stands for Reimagining Tragedy in Africa and the Global South, is an exciting 5-year research project led by Professor Mark Fleischman and Mandla Mbotwe at the University of Cape Town's Centre for Theatre, Dance and Performance Studies. This project proposes to take a concept, tragedy, from the very beginnings of theatre in its European manifestation and to reimagine it from an African and Global South perspective. The research is directed at investigating the complex challenges of our global post-colonial present and looking towards our possible futures both inside and outside of the theatre discipline. The project proposes to do this in a variety of respects. Firstly, being through the development and staging of our 4 practice as research-based theatre productions. The second is through conducting field research interviews, discussing tragedy on and off the stage in Africa. And finally, the third is showcasing the findings on an open repository platform in order to centralize African conversations around tragedy as a theatre genre and to work towards decolonizing Western theatre pedagogies by sharing the rehearsal processes of African artists. Today, we will be referring to the process of capturing, archiving, and showcasing Antigone, Not Quite Quiet, the first of 4 of the practice's research-based theatre productions that was developed and presented in 2019 at the Baxter Theatre Centre in Cape Town, South Africa.
The South African theatre environment, and particularly its rehearsal space, is built on common collaboration, networks of exchanges, and flows of stories. The culture of theatre making within this country suggests an environment where every participant in the devising of a work can be an equally weighted node of information that contributes with their background, talent, skill, inspiration, and perception. And because a South African rehearsal room can have a diverse demographic, the possibilities of exchange are enormous. Stepping into such a space and interacting with the bodies of information could have you believe you are browsing the internet. In a 2015 interview titled "The Internet is Afropolitan" with the Chimurenga Chronic, Achille Mbebe weaves this connection much tighter. He states that the workings of digital technologies and the philosophies of African cultures share similar characteristics of transformation, mutation, conversion, and circulation. These characteristics are something that has been a part of the continent since its early history, something that has shaped the myths of origin and the movement of people and society and how they have interacted with their environment. The workshop methodology of making theatrical work, combining source material, performers' personal experiences, and current social concerns informs many works. Characters, sounds, bodies, images all change and transform their shape and form in much the same way that Mbembe sees the same happenings on the continent in pre-colonial times and in present digital times. And in the process of making theatre towards a single theatrical story, many other stories happen along the way.
When I was asked to document the 6-week rehearsal process of this performance, I was not given any criteria, list of expectations, what to film, or how to go about documenting the rehearsal process. In fact, I had only once before documented a rehearsal period, knowing it was just to be stored on some hard drive, rarely to be accessed again, as much rehearsal footage usually is. But I knew this footage was going to be used to answer academic explorations, and I was also aware there were to be 3 other performances created that would lead to an eventual data set for cross-comparison. I wasn't looking for a story or a narrative to follow. I wanted to record everything in order to allow the academic researchers to explore the footage in whichever way they wanted to, whether from the angle of musicology, history, sociology, or performance studies, as examples. Michel Rolf-Trouillot warns of the 4 points in history making when narratives can either be silenced or allowed to pass into historical production. And those are the moments of fact creation, the moments of fact assembly, the moments of fact retrieval, and the moments of retrospective significance. For the same reasons I tried to film everything in order to avoid any opportunity of potentially silencing a narrative in the moments of fact creation, I also wanted to avoid impacting the narratives that were unfolding on the rehearsal floor. I was acutely aware of how my body, which is white and female presenting, in the space may impact the process, and therefore I was very purposeful in my methodologies of data capturing in order to try and silence my presence in the documentation. These were the ways in which I chose to reduce my documenting footprint, if you will. I tried to be consistent in sitting in the same place every day with my camera. I remembered to be present, yet not overly react to anything that was happening on stage. I always tried and attempted to avoid having my voice or my body documented. And I also was very purposeful in not talking with the cast or creatives about the performance because I didn't want to impact potentially how they might think on the rehearsal floor. All of these points I mentioned were my attempts in trying to remove myself from the archive while also trying to objectively document a process. However, the next steps of fact assembly involved capturing the footage into metadata, and this involved labeling the footage with keywords. This was the moment I realized that I had not only failed in silencing my story from the archive, but in fact I held the greatest power in being able to decide and curate the moments of fact retrieval. Here I was, a monolingual person being responsible for capturing multilingual data. It obviously harks back to the systematics of colonial oppression in the ways in which colonizers labeled, named, and categorized indigenous objects they had no cultural understanding or connection to. While the video footage captured from the rehearsals imparts its own story, the keywords surrounding it will ultimately decide how one can have access to the archive, to the story, and how the reader will choose to navigate through it, thus reaching those moments as Trouillot refers to as retrospective significance. Such conversations are imperative to the ways we need to be thinking around an African approach to archiving, acknowledging that archives are never neutral and reflect colonial epistemologies. How can we move towards a post-colonial archive and initiate, as Walter Mignolo refers to, an epistemic disobedience in order to generate decolonial freedom?
Archives can also strive for decolonization in digital spaces. This forms a part of the digital humanities landscape, which creates a contact zone for various different disciplines. Digital humanities encourages the building of a multitude of stories out of an archive. In line with this project being under the umbrella of the University of Cape Town, and as the Library of the University was exploring how to consolidate a showcase platform site for its digital collections, the Archive of Retags became one of the first development projects in this task. The name for the new platform was selected as Ibali, a word of the Amaxhosa people for the story, which is meant to drive the site's objective to present stories through media and digital objects. As part of Digital Library Services, we had chosen to explore Omeka S as a showcasing tool for this institutional showcase repository. Omeka S is a web publishing platform and is designed to create relationships between objects and collections, as well as describe them through linked open data resources on the internet. Its primary focus is in organizing elements of a collection such that the links in between them and the greater elements of the internet are strengthened, allowing for much more relevant searches and deeper explorations. Getting things ready for showcasing through Omeka S requires an exploration of the material that was captured and an identification of the key elements of the collection, whether it might be media or non-media, such as people and places. The second phase is drawing up a detailed list of possible properties that each item can have in order to describe it best. Consider an image of a rehearsal process of a few performers practicing one of the songs in the show. Omeka S allows you to not only capture the information about the photo, such as when it was taken and by whom and who was in it, but then it is also possible to create a link to a page for the people that were in it, from where you can see not only information about them, but all the other media that they are part of, so that it immediately becomes possible to follow the path of a performer through a rehearsal journey. And of course, Omeka S also uses keywords. Now, a keyword is a jumping point to somewhere else. As in when one is telling a story and the other person says, "Now that reminds me of." However, a keyword also has the potential to be a link, and one of the characteristics of a good story is in how it moves, links, or jumps from event to the event, character to character, place to place. However, as the person curating the archive, it is a delicate balancing act between imparting how you identify the media, the desire to consolidate keywords to enable more jumps, and how to be faithful to the many different interpretations of events. But it is also the flexibility of the digital that can come to your rescue in this case. Consider with the archiving of the rehearsal process of Antigone, what if the participants in the production, the crew and the performers, create their own media elements to tell us their story of the production? With many of the moments of the rehearsal process being digitized, it becomes possible for them to select the moments that they want in order to be able to tell their story of the rehearsal process. Omeka S allows for such a variety of curated pages to be created out of the same elements of the archive, and so much so that it's just one story that's being told with the archive. So our next step with this archive project would be to invite the participants to create their own site based on the same set of elements, thus allowing people to experience the rehearsal process from the eye of each different individual. But also, the participants can work together to build stories out of different themes or events, creating curated pages which showcase a particular aspect of this shared community event. Because this digital archive is not static, because the digital objects can be relabeled and recurated, it is always possible to go into the different media items and adjust the keywords, add, consolidate, expand, whatever the needs might be. This makes it a collaborative curation process from within, further promoting a kind of community ownership of the material that is put on display. Outside bodies then do not have a final say on the presentation of a community's own material, and the power of classification and categorization can come from the participants themselves. And a key part of this process would be the addition of a multiplicity of languages to the archive, so that the keywords and concepts can mutate across languages, providing a broad spectrum of access. One of the other aspects of Omeka is it also provides options for those visiting to talk back to the archive through the use of comments and form submissions to add on or to clarify something. While this has been a big part of our online sphere, it is probably important to acknowledge that this is merely a digital extension of a quality of storytelling and performance that has been happening on the African continent since the beginning of time.
Archives, just like storytellers, are custodians of narratives and are constantly generating stories. No matter how much we may try to make archives or data capturing objective in the arts, they can never be neutral. They will always succumb to the will of the person sharing them. While the Retags project tries to open up space for multiple perspectives and narratives to be read from the archive, it recognizes that it has already undergone its own curation in its labeling and naming of keywords. It is because of this shortcoming that we advocate for the need to further explore methods of creating epistemic disobediences and how opening up the archive and its metadata to a greater, wider community may be steps forward in doing this. However, if we can shift focus from the inherited notions of epistemic violences of the archive to Stuart Hall's observations of celebrating the archive as a living institution that is by definition incomplete and open to the future, we can start to work with the notion of the post-colonial archive being an active subject in transforming and shaping history and its narratives.
Even at the basic level, the Archive of the Retax project is doing something quite important, and it is sharing the story of a South African theatre. In this case, a South African rehearsal room can mutate and migrate beyond its physical dimensions. But this power of digital storytelling through the archive, found in its multiplicity, is also a challenge to our human need for our own version of events. There are as many storytellers as there are bodies. The digital allows us to take the time to engage with each.
Thank you again for giving us the time to present our work on this platform.
Sorry, just to round up and say a big thank you for having us on the show, on the program, from me and Jayne.
Thank you so much. That was very exciting too. I am kind of floored by the amount of labor going into that metadata work, and really transformative there. And I have not seen Omeka used in that way of community archiving. So again, we have some new people coming in. We will take the questions at the end of all the panelists. So please place those in the Q&A at any time, and then we'll take them at the end. So the next presenter, we will be welcoming Bayo Puddicombe, presenting African narratives and video games.
Okay, hi everyone. First of all, I have to say that it's a huge pleasure to be here. I have to say thank you to Dr. James for inviting me. Just a small note of correction, Kaylin. The surname is Puddicombe, and there's a bit of history to that. I'll say that, first of all, I'm deeply honored to be here. Or let me say that again. And, you know, to be honest, I don't have that much of a background in digital humanities, but I did, you know, a bit of work to find out some more. But still, you know, from the keynotes, I was so floored by all the information and the work from Professor Kim and Esther. And what struck me most was how systematic the dehumanization process was. And I have a bit of that in my history as well. You may be wondering why a Black boy from Africa has a Welsh surname, but I'm a descendant of former slaves who came back to the continent once they obtained their freedom, and they were able to retrace their roots back to a place called Badagry in Lagos State. And interestingly, there was also a departure point in the city of Badagry. Was a port, so to speak, and they had the same references that we saw yesterday, the point of no return. And, you know, for me, I'm going to do a lot more to explore that, but let me move on for now. I'm going to share my screen now. Just a small disclaimer. I'm not exactly an academic, so you might find that there are quite a few pop culture references in my presentation and not so many academic ones. So please bear with me on that one. But yeah, so taking it away now. My topic is, you know, African narratives and video games. And I think it's a very important topic to look at because I see that a lot of the projects here they are going in an overall positive direction, digitizing and use of virtual reality, augmented reality. And I think that that's actually the best way to go, moving with the times, and it allows you to capture some of the elements that are important in, recreating and telling those stories in an impactful way. So moving on. Gaming is huge, right? And this is something that a lot of people outside of the industry do not understand. What you're seeing here is size of the gaming industry relative to other more established forms. And this is typical of innovation as we see it today. New technology, new media comes, and it kind of eclipses everything that pre-existed before it. It may not be well understood, but within a small niche, and it just explodes after some time. Same way smartphones came, and in less than 15 or so years, we see that all other types of mobile devices have been obliterated. Entire industries and markets have, been subsumed into this singular device. And what makes games so powerful is that it's an interactive medium. So when you're telling stories with games, it's so powerful because the player, it becomes the protagonist. They have to step into the shoes of the protagonist. They take up the form, and you see that in the language. When someone is playing a game, okay, I have to conquer this mission, or I have to take on this boss. There's a connection there, and it's really powerful compared to other forms of media. I think games have that unique interactivity where you don't just get the opportunity to empathize with the characters in the story. You actually, at some point, have to suspend belief and take on the persona of those characters. And I think that's a very important point to note. So given how large or how big the gaming industry is, there's still a problem of diversity. It's maybe 45 years or so that we've had video games as a form of media and entertainment. And it's been predominated by a certain race, not intentionally, but it's just so happened that the resources and the tools to develop video games have been concentrated in the West. So for us, what happens with that is that you'll always, create content using the stories or the background or the information, the context, your individualized context. And so what happens is that because we don't have enough diversity on the supply side, creating video game content, there's a tendency for the stories, the protagonists, the characters to take up a particular shape or form that is not representative of the entire body of video game consumers. As you can see from the charts I'm sharing, only 1% of video game developers identify as African American, and that's had a huge impact on all what we see in terms of gaming. And this is not just a gaming industry problem. It cuts across, different forms of media, even video and TV. It's changing, but it's something that has to be acknowledged so that we can look for ways to address and remediate. So I'll talk a bit about storytelling in games in general, and then I'll talk more about what we did as a company to tell our own stories, to tell African stories or African narratives in our own ways. Usually there's I won't say it's a set formula, but there's a way, there's a system, or there's a science to telling stories within games. which is quite powerful, and it's very, very effective. We've seen it over and over again, where you create an obstacle, and which is in the gameplay. There's a challenge. There's something the player has to overcome, and in the process of overcoming that obstacle, they hit a point where you tell a part or a section of the story. So that's unlocking that is seen as a reward of sorts, and it ties into the whole mechanics of how the brain works, where rewarding certain activities tends to drive further engagement and a desire to it drives the release of dopamine in the brain, which causes further engagement and a desire to keep going on. Some people have abused this system and used it negatively to drive addictive elements. Even non-game platforms have done this. But what I like to say is that you don't want to throw away the baby with the bathwater. There's some positive here, and it's a powerful tool. Used correctly, you can use it to tell compelling stories and engage people on a deep and meaningful level. But for us, interestingly, we've not been afforded the luxury of this model in most of our games, and I'll explain why in a bit. See, because for where we are coming from, when we decided to start up as a company, Chop Up Games, we looked at the lack of diversity, and we said, okay, there are a lot of game players here. There's a lot of foreign content coming in, and there's nobody creating games for Africa. So our focus was to create games for the local markets that was contextual, that people could relate to. For instance, one of our first games, and one of the really, really successful ones, was called Downfall. And a downfall is a commercial bus that you encounter on the streets of Lagos. They have several peculiarities that make them stand out. They're really, creative drivers, for lack of a better means of expression. They come up with all sorts of shenanigans. And when we're doing the research, we found out that we could draw parallels for this in different African markets. So, for instance, in Ghana, they had their equivalent was called the trotro. In Kenya, I believe it's called the matatu. And it was just something interesting. And why this game really took off was because a lot of people could relate with the characters, they could relate with the vehicles, and it was so exciting for them to see that this is something that I identify with. So for us, we've not had the luxury of storytelling with narrative, because if you look at the traditional gaming scene, there's a lot of data required to be able to do cutscenes, whether you're doing video, audio recordings, and all of that, and that adds up to the bulk of of the game content. But for us, we are in a market where, to our target or primary audience, data is very expensive. So we try to make our games as small and as compact as possible. 50 MB is huge for us. We've done tiny games, and then over time, as the conditions have gotten better, we've made larger and larger games. But we found other ways to identify with our audience, and we prefer to show and not tell. Okay, one thing I forgot to mention is that most of our games are mobile first. That's our focus, because we saw that the smartphone was going to be the dominant technology platform for Africa to catch up with the rest of the world in terms of digitalization. So as I was saying, we decided to show and do more showing and less telling. So on the screen, you have samples of some of our games, just showing you the graphic. Monkey Post is a street soccer type game that's really popular in this part of the world, where five-a-side, they play football. It's usually an open field, in the middle of the city. So if you look at the background, there's some, urban type buildings in there. We have another one called Tierra Racing. So one of the experiences I've had in my interactions, even with Africans in diasporas, there's this impression that Africa is a village, or it's not very underdeveloped, and we don't have cities, and we don't have public transportation, and we don't have running water. It may be true in some places, but that's not the whole story. That's not the full story. We have cosmopolitan areas. We have cities, that have an active nightlife. We have we have quite a bit of infrastructure. So one of the things that you'll see is that you go into games, and you select location Lagos, Nigeria, and you see the city with infrastructure. It's showing what, rather than telling you what exists, we're pushing that narrative, or we're pushing a positive narrative just by showcasing from our own context what is available in this part of the world. Yeah, and for me, it's really, really important to say that we have so many stories to tell, and I'm realizing that more and more in my participation in this event. We have very rich history. We have very rich culture. I can't tell you the number of concepts that we have storyboarded for a game that we haven't started work on, simply because the resources to do it justice are not available, and to constrain it into and to work within the constraints that we have to deliver this quality is just not there. There's a certain negative narrative that tends to be the focus when Africa is discussed in the West. But we need to take ownership and start pushing and promoting some of our positive, more positive aspects. The picture you can see on your screen now is an artist's rendition of the old Benin Kingdom from 1874, if I'm not mistaken, before it was destroyed. And I had seen some writing on this, how the city was well structured. They had lighting. The streets were very well kept. They were cleaned every day. They had night lighting. They had moats for defense, and everywhere was segmented. Very well structured and powerful kingdom empire that stretched even all the way to Ghana at the peak of their sojourn. But we don't see those stories. We don't hear of it. I would love to one day be able to create a game around this, where instead of telling people about it, let them experience. The beauty of games is that you can take certain liberties. You can rewrite history, so to speak, and put in your own version of events and twist it a bit. You have the artistic license, so to speak. And this is just one of so many. When you look across, the different tribes, there's so many powerful stories that, just the knowledge of this, I feel, is very empowering to Africans, both home and away. And for me, I think that it's one of the things that we need to explore, especially in our past. But there's nothing also stopping us from going into the future and creating these narratives. I'm a big believer in how art can inspire creativity in the next generation, and we've seen it over and over again, where people imagine certain realities, and then over time, the technology or the capacity to bring those realities into existence came about. And some of the people who created those things were in themselves inspired by what they read beforehand. So I think my time is up. Thank you again for this opportunity, and that's my segment.
Thank you for telling us about your work, Chop Up Games. It's so important with the video game industry kind of overwhelmed with the violence of the presumed white male narrator, which kind of, when you attempt to change that, inspires sort of rage with the audience as they kind of assume that that is the only player out there. So it's exciting to see the body of work going against that grain, the necessity of that. So we're excited to talk about that more. So we're kind of, yeah, if you, excited to bring on our last panelist, and then we'll take questions. So if you start having questions, feel free to pop those into the chat or Q&A as we're bringing on the last panelist now. And this is Dr. Shola Adenekan from the University of Amsterdam, and who is an assistant professor of literary and cultural analysis, presenting Storying, the first book-length study on African literature and new media.
Thank you, everybody. I'm looking at James, so can you hear me? Sometimes, okay, my student have complained a few times. It's an honor to be here, and I want to thank the organizers for this wonderful and highly engaging workshop. Now, I'm just going to share my screen to start with. If I can find it, yeah, okay, here we are. Sure. So that's my book, coming out in March 2021. And the story of this particular book began in early 2007 during an email conversation with Dr. Wambu Nwagi, who was at the time a scholar of political economy at the University of Toronto. Wambu and I were talking about the power of stories and why Africans need to tell the African story, which I think Bayo articulated very well in his presentation. And during the conversations, I was discussing ideas about PhD, about doing a doctoral program. And one people pointed out to me why the age we live in is different from the previous decades because of the power of the internet and the need for us to talk about what this moment in time, the digital age, means for African voices. And in infinite generosity, Wambu then introduced me to Biavanga Wanaina and Keguro Macharia. This particular conversation then led me on a journey to a network of writers, photographers, scholars, critics, and readers in various online communities. So I joined various online communities as part of my research. So this includes LISA, such as Concerned Kenyan Writers Group, that used to be on Gmail. Then there was Generation Kenya, Koroga, Creativity, Ederi, USA African Dialogues, and several blogs. Among them is Diary of a Mad Kenyan Woman, Gukira, run by Keguro Macharia, and Black Looks, which is run by Sokari Ekine. Now, my interaction with these different literary spaces revolve around what Collier de Odutola 2012 in his very important book refers to as factual ethnography. In my case, I was a participant observer for some of the time, but most of the time, I was just an observer. Now, you may want to ask why Nigeria and Kenya. As you can see in my slide, I settled mainly on Nigeria and Kenya as case study because these two countries arguably produce the majority of most talk about writers in the context of Anglophone African literature. The body of written works and intellectual productions coming from these two countries and relating to is also very extensive. For example, these two countries have produced most of the winners of the Kane Prize for African writing. Furthermore, along with South Africa, Nigeria and Kenya possess the most digital hubs on the continent, thus putting them at the forefront of digital innovations in Africa. Many of the pioneering African bloggers from the early part of this century anyway, come from Nigeria and Kenya, and digital culture is highly vibrant in these two countries, which is why both have caught the attention of digital organizations or companies such as Google, Facebook, and Twitter, all of which have business interests in Nigeria. Now, with chapter 1, I engage more with the idea of literary networks in the digital age. And in this very first chapter, I address what I see as an under-theorized aspect of African literature, which is the analysis of digital literary networks and their importance to our understanding of literary history in Nigeria and Kenya. I utilize the concept of network in analyzing the many layers of relationship between the analog terrain of print publication and that of the digital. I studied computing for my first degree, so my understanding of the concept of networks and the applications are both loosely based on networking morphology taught in computing at undergraduate level at university, which connects to the different structures and forms of network. As a literary theorist, I apply the metaphor of network in unpacking the types of connections to be found within African literature and within the global community of literatures. Literary networks, in my view, provide an important means to theorize the intersection of politics, class, and literature. In this particular chapter, I foregrounded my argument on Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie's short story for Granta, which was originally published in Granta before it was turned into part of a collection of short story, which is on Jumping Monkey Hill. And I use this particular story, Jumping Monkey Hill, to envision the world of Anglophone African writing as something that looks at that, what you're looking at the bottom right, with London as the main hub and all the other cities on the continent, in Anglophone Africa anyway, as the sub-hubs. And these main hubs also have their own sub-mini hubs attached to them. That's the world of book publishing, by the way. Whereas the digital literary networks resemble the top version, what you can see at the top. So you can see that the world of book publishing has Western metropolises as the main hubs. But the world of online publishing is truly multi-directional, as you can see from that picture, in its conception and its functioning. However, I point out that it is important to stress that digital network also carry much of the hangover of market economies, because networks, by their nature, privilege some groups while marginalizing other groups, the others. And given this complexity, I place my analysis of digital literary networks in the context of Nigeria and Kenya within these settings. Number one, as a starting point for studying the power dynamic within global literary networks. Two, as providing a means to articulate literary history and development. Three, has given good insight into the way in which class operates within Kenyan and Nigerian literary circles. And as recognizing that this digital network aesthetic, there's an aesthetic connected to the digital network that is being produced by Nigerian and Kenyan writers. And lastly, as providing insight that digital networks can be read as material metaphors. With chapter 2, I focus on class and poetry in the digital age. And I started that chapter by examining a poem posted on concerned Kenyan writer Lisa in August 2010 by the Kenyan writer Shaija Patel. That's the poem you can see on the slide. The speaker in this particular poem underlines the way in which the digital space brings the past and the present together. And African poetic tradition is yet again going through a transformation. That's my own reading. I'm talking about my own reading of this particular poem. A transformation without shedding its past. And I think yesterday, Dr. Kwabena Opoku-Agyemang and the linguist Kola Tumbosun demonstrated this connection between the past and the present. What we can deduce from work like mine and that of Tumbosun and Opoku-Agyemang is that the poetic tradition as we know it is becoming digitized. And the speaker in this particular poem is warning that poems, the tradition that refuse to take their place within the digital landscape are in danger of becoming moribund. And just as oral performance incorporates audiences into their materials and adapts text to the mood of the audience, what you find is that poets in the online writing space are doing the same by inviting readers to partake in the creative process, in addition to letting outsiders to review work in progress and to make comments on these materials. Now, with regard to chapter 3, I return to fiction, short story. And here, in this particular chapter, I address representations in online short stories. I argued that much of the writing and thinking taking place around literature in the digital space reflects transnational conversations and modes of labor that the middle classes tend to indulge in, because the digital space makes for a globalized lifestyle ingrained in materialism. And as identity keeps changing in time and space, writers and some of their readers can be said to fit into multiple relationships and several subject positions. That's in my analysis of the relationship between writers and readers. So the next 4 chapters, just because of time, focus on the intersectional links between class and sexuality, and how these are foregrounded by body politics. The writers and artists alike have continuously used literature and their creative works to inscribe society's point of view and their own personal point of view on the African body. What I was trying to do in these chapters is to direct readers to the way in which marginalized bodies, notably queer Africans and African women, are being inscribed upon by writers, by society, and by both the print and new media machine. Literature in the digital space and the discussion that come about through online writing provide a counter to conservative and distorted views on African sexuality and history. It provides a voice for repressed identities in all their simple and complicated forms. This is because in the age that we live in, especially with social media and web blogs, these are becoming real spaces to discuss matters deemed too provocative, too dissident, and too immoral to broach an ordinary and physical, to be broached in ordinary and physical public spaces. Furthermore, I point out that emerging creative writings are showing us unseen patterns of violence, sexual violence. These points cannot be overstressed. Why the near ubiquity of mobile phones and internet cafes in Nigeria and Kenya means that acquiring and consuming and producing digital information raises new challenges for those fictional characters who use the internet for sexual experimentation. And one example I drew on in my work is that of Shaita Patel. Again, that's a short story slash drama titled Last Word Caught in the Act. And here she illustrates the danger that the internet poses for people who are gay or lesbian in Africa, especially when they use the internet to partake in cyber activities. I argue that short creative writing can also be read as coming out fictional narratives made possible by the user space. They represent the dangers facing people who are not 100% heterosexual within the online and offline spaces. And the fictional digital characters can be read as mirroring the real experiences of Africans. But then, many of these stories also reveal that there's an underrepresentation of poor and working class Africans, because we don't tend to see them in much of the literature that is being published online. Gay and lesbian characters, for example, are often portrayed as well-to-do city dwellers with disposable income and who are able to move seamlessly between Africa and non-African spaces. The lifestyle of most of these fictional characters is not too different from that of transnational middle class and highly educated writers publishing online. And to round off, I finish by looking at the social media and the aesthetics of the quotidian. In this regard, what I was trying to do, or what I did, was to draw the reader's attention to the near or total neglect of the ordinary and the commonplace in what we do as scholars. The quotidian is often the foundation for much of Africa's artistic endeavors. Everyday objects are the tools with which writers produce fictional narratives and poems. Going back to Adichie's Jumping Monkey Hill, for example, we have Ujunwa, the protagonist, going to the airport. The speaker in this particular poem you are looking at, Wambu Kamiru's poem, Night Dresses, is applying a lipstick and wearing false nails. These are all routine acts that carry poignant messages. Poems and songs are carved out of everyday emotions, such as crying, eating, and praying. And as scholars, we need to pay attention to this. And also, much of the television and cinematic productions in Nigeria and Kenya speak to the everyday lived experience of Africans. Therefore, the quotidian deserves the same level of seriousness that we attach to the phenomenon, not only because it is the stuff of the popular, but also because we cannot fully comprehend African humanity without it. How do we articulate why people laugh, cry, love, and work? These are not mere human instincts and basic needs. People put a lot of thought into planning their daily routine. Monumental events in people's life are brought about by everyday actions and thoughts. So what I was trying to do was to bring together the phenomenon and the ordinary, the commonplace, and to argue that every aspect of African life, of African humanity, is being depicted by writers publishing in the digital space. Thank you. So that's my presentation. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for wrapping us up. It feels like yours connects well to everyone else and kind of ties it all together. We have several questions already pouring in, so I'm just going to start taking questions now for all panelists. The first question that's come through is for everyone. So it says, how can one get funding to work on digital storytellings and the archives? Anyone who wants to answer.
Okay. It depends on where the person is. If you are based I live in Germany at the moment. If you're based in Germany, you can apply for funding with the DFG, which is the German Research Foundation. I think it depends on the location and the place and the opportunities available. So, yeah.
Kellen, I'm wondering if with your permission and that of the organizers, if one or two people in the idea reach might want to speak to that question. It's an important one. Maybe Brian, I don't know if Brian likes to speak to this. It's a question of funding that might go beyond the skill sets of the presenters.
Yeah. And it is very location specific, and also just everywhere you are, there's multiple grant opportunities.
Yeah, funding is a really tough issue everywhere, and I don't really know the situation in Africa. I know for funding here in the U.S., it's what drives a lot of projects, and some of the main funders are the NEH and the National Endowment for the Humanities and the Mellon Foundation. And it's a tricky thing because there's a lot of projects, I think, that are a lot of really innovative projects that can be done in a lightweight way with sort of minimal technology that don't require funding. And sometimes the need for funding I've seen makes you define a project more in a more complex way than it may need to be. So we are, I think the other thing I've seen with funding in the US, historically for digital humanities projects, it's been, or it used to be more this way, about innovation and innovative technology. That often would come at the expense of sustainability or attention to inclusion of different types of stories that haven't historically been included in the archives. And I think some of the funding agencies here have been moving, have recognized that a little bit and are moving towards providing more support for sustainability plans and more community-oriented digital projects. So I can't really add anything about the African perspective here, unfortunately, but I know funding is I think maybe another strategy that could be pursued, and maybe this we can talk about this with our next speakers, is partnering with libraries or other institutions that might be able to provide more infrastructure or technical support or long-term sustainability for these kinds of projects.
Yeah. But perhaps something to add to that, just in closing, is to call attention to the British Libraries Endangered Archives project that provides funding for people around the world. There's been a couple of projects in the last couple of years from Nigeria that are funded. So you may want to look in that direction. And like Shola said, this is location specific. And I know that many people back at home in different African countries have been lucky enough to attract grants and funding from outside their countries. It's unfortunately so, but it's what it is.
Thank you for that. I mean, funding is very important, especially for the large digital humanities projects. It can be very difficult to get through because they're time and labor intensive. So we have a question, it's a bit long here, from Susanna Sachs, a lot to unpack. Thank you. So it says, thank you all for these exciting presentations of some really important work, and to KU for hosting this exciting symposium. My question is for Dr. Adenekan. I'm curious about your suggestion that African poetry, which does not accede to digital objects and circulations, threatens to become moribund. How particular is this to poetry, do you think, and why? I'm particularly interested in this question as it relates to form, given the popularity of, for instance, radio and newspapers. As, I'm sorry, I might not pronounce this correctly, Adewatoa Bayo pointed out, for poetry publication locally. Is the digital necessarily prior to other publication formats for poetry?
Thank you. Thank you, Susanna. Digital is important, but I think what we also need to recognize, like both the digital and the print, they have a sort of symbiotic relationship with one another. So both can exist and both are still very germane. I think what Shata Patel was discussing in our poem was not that we should forget the oral tradition or the tradition of publishing work in print, but that the digital space also offers ample and robust opportunities for poets. For example, there's a poet, that's a Nigerian poet, Rasak Malik Bolao. Every week, sometimes even every day, he publishes spoken poems online. When notable Yoruba poets or writers pass away, he will compose a dirge to them and post it on Facebook and on Instagram. And at the same time, Bolahan also performs live in Ibadan. Okay, and also he has a collection of poetry coming up. So it's not that writers are not, or poets should not publish. She only embrace digital platform. Okay, all these different spaces, these different platforms offer opportunities for poems. And also, as scholars, we also need to pay attention to all these to these different spaces, and also think about how they converge as well, especially with regard to the way in which a new generation of poets are using these different spaces. Okay, I hope that helps.
Thank you. I think we have one other question right now. Please also just continue to add questions for our panelists in the Q&A or chat. So this is for Dr. Adoro. It says, thank you so much for a brilliant presentation. I wonder if any further observations as to how you think this etc. archive of African literature might impact African literary form itself. We see increase in flash fictions, Twitterature, and the like across the continent. Are these here to stay, do you think? Can we possibly consider the reemergence of poetry as part of the logic of the social media archivescape?
Thank you for that lovely question. Social media has not necessarily gone in the direction that lots of literary scholars imagined. So, 2012, particularly was this really bountiful year in which you saw a lot of experimentation with literary form. So we had Teju Cole's Small Fates. We had Jennifer Egan, an American novelist, her sci-fi story published on Twitter in the New Yorker, right? There was this sense that social media opened up all kinds of formal experimental possibilities, that in fact the novel as a form was endangered. But what we've seen so far is that, to be honest, we all still hold on to kind of conventional literary forms. And that even though we find, you know, moments of literary experimentation with social media, and it's kind of fragmenting and miscellarizing power, that many of these texts still continue to be curiosities, in the sense that, you know, Twitter fiction is fantastic, it's great, it's fascinating, but I mean, it's not as if it's changing the literary industry. It's not as if it's changing literary culture, right? And that, so I would say that my sense of how social media's archival power, or social media, you know, the way it operates as a form, as a knowledge machinery, that I will be a little cautious or modest in terms of how it's revolutionizing literary form, and literary form in a way that is significant for literary culture and the market. Perhaps the exception will be maybe Instagram poetry, which itself, we are still watching to see if it's just a passing trend, or if it's going to develop into something durable. And I am placing my bet on the fact that it's going to stick around for a very long time and continue to shape the way we think about poetry. But Insta poetry has been the one form that I think has tried to cultivate a robust archive, and that has really taken the that has really gotten the attention of the literary market, right? Which is a big part of the literary ecosystem. The market has to be interested in a form for it to be able to circulate and build in a particular kind of way. And that may actually just be because Instagram poetry is a very unique form. It's not even, I don't know if poetry is the right thing to call it, but it feels organic and right for Instagram as a space. And that, so for users on Instagram, it's not as if they are having to actually rethink their notion of what poetry is. Insta poetry feels like an organic Instagram content. But aside from that, I wouldn't say that social media has terribly, changed or opened up, vast avenues for literary experimentation. But then again, the dominance or the penetration of the technology in every spheres of life is really, honestly, about 10 years old. Yes, Facebook was invented in 2004. And before that, there were this social media, the pre-Web 2.0 social media networks. But the way in which social media is structuring our lives in very intimate ways is still a relatively recent phenomenon. So time is going to tell.
Thank you. We actually have one more question, and this comes from one of our own panelists. TD, do you want to speak up?
Hi, everyone. So I have two questions, and they are both for Bayo. So the first one is, apart from existing in a low-income economy, what other I'd say, what other things would you say is accountable? What other thing would you say is accountable for the marginalization of Black people in the gaming space? So that's the first question. Now, the second question is this. I have noticed, like I went through the ChopUp site, and I've noticed that many of the games have a very, they have a very Southwestern presence. Like you have the Mama Put narrative, you have the Danfo driver narrative. They all seem to center around Lagos and the Southwestern portrayal in, and I was wondering, wouldn't that also be marginalizing other parts of Nigerian narrative or African narrative as a whole? Wouldn't you be also doing what you're trying to prevent by marginalizing some voices? And is there a way where do you think the future is? Like, what do you think you're going to do after this? Where are you taking this game? How do you plan to keep rewriting the narrative of Africa, which is a good thing you're doing, without marginalizing some spaces?
Okay, thanks, Titi. Fantastic questions. Let me take the first one. Yes, so what we found was that when you talk about industries such as gaming, they're based on technology revolutions, on top of technology revolutions. Look at Silicon Valley and how it developed. First, it was in the 1950s, and they were essentially making silicon chips, and that was hardware. And then the next generation, or the next wave, they started making software tools to run on top of the hardware. And so now we're talking about, and then from there, the internet, the networking revolution came up, and then the internet on top of that. Now we're talking about Web 2.0. It's a layered progression in terms of advancement, where the previous generation creates a foundation for the next generation. So the challenge that I have seen, or I have found, is that even though the internet is an equalizer, and the information and tools that you need to create this kind of content is available to everyone, there's no foundation. So for you to create content in this space, you have to do a lot of the extra work to build the foundation and then compete with people who have access to this ecosystem, who have access to a more developed or structured ecosystem. And that's, the primary challenge. It's not, it's a consequence of, Africa not developing and pushing innovation and technology and investing, the way we should. That's for the first one. For the second question, you're right. One of the things I mentioned is that, when you create games, you're telling stories, and usually you tell stories from your own context, right? And so I grew up in the Southwest. I've been to other parts of the country. So I won't be surprised if, at least my own creative inputs would be biased in that way. But having said that, we've also tried to expand beyond that. I was talking about the Benin Kingdom and, some of the things that they were doing there. We've also tried to do some games, using northern concepts or derivatives. You would have seen Okada Rider. We did a game to, just put our voice out there about, what was going on with Boko Haram insurgency. That was one of our first also Android games called, I think, Zambiza Assault. And, we put all of that out there, but ideally, you want to have someone who has a connection. They will be able to tell those stories in a much more impactful way than from an outsider's perspective. So yeah, you're right. In a sense, we share some of that, but the best way to address it is to actually spend time in research and immersing in the culture that you're trying to project and represent.
Thank you to all of our panelists for an excellent Q&A. We have a closing address. So I'm going to pass this off for introductions to, I think, either James Yacou or Brian Rosenblum. I don't remember whom. Brian.
Yeah, I will do. Let's see, give me a second. Okay. Am I on the video? I only see James here. So.
Yes, you are.
Oh, okay. I don't see myself. Well, thank you all. Those were I loved all those presentations. It's been such a fantastic program. Let's move on to our last session for the day. The closing address. It's titled "Open Access and Digital Storytelling," and I think it's going to be more of a conversation and a synthesis and kind of reaction to what we've heard, and maybe a little high level picture of some of the developments in recent years. And to do that, we'll hear from Irina Kuchma and Babalola, and just a brief introduction to both of them. Irina Kuchma is the EIFL Open Access Program Manager, working in collaboration with libraries and library consortia in more than 60 countries in Africa, Asia, and Europe. She advocates for open access to research results, facilitates development and implementation of open science policies and infrastructures, and provides support and training. She serves on the UNESCO Open Science Advisory Committee, the advisory board of the community-led Open Publication Infrastructures Project, and she's also an associate editor for the Directory of Open Access Journals. Babalola is a PhD candidate at the University of Toronto. Her research interest lies in contemporary literary theories, Afro-Canadian literature, and the digital humanities. Lately, TT has been studying the relationship between the state of the digital humanities and economic development in developing countries, particularly those in sub-Saharan Africa. She also investigates digital culture, exploring in her work the gaps between digital literacy and digital humanities activities in the global South. So I will invite participants to post questions in the Q&A for afterwards. We'll have a few minutes, and now I will turn it over to Irina and TT.
Thanks a lot, Brian. Let me share my slides. They're coming. Just bear with me for a minute, please. Yes, I think now you should see them. So as Brian said, I have a privilege to work with academic library consortia in 16 African countries, and together we develop open access to publications projects, as well as open science and open research projects, and a lot of topics we discuss in our academic circles are very much aligned with what was discussed yesterday and today. So thanks a lot for inviting me and for giving this opportunity to share. And I'd like to mention two recent policy documents that we put together, which I think flag the issues that have already been flagged in those days, and suggest some solutions at least in university contexts. And the first one is called Open Science Africa, Principles and Actions for Global Participation. And those principles were developed by a group called LeapSense. And LeapSense is a community of academic librarians and also representatives of research and education networks. And in Africa, there are national research and education networks, for example, EcoConnect in Nigeria, Garnet in Ghana, Kenet in Kenya, RANU in Uganda, MAREN in Malawi, and in other countries as well. And there are also regional research and education networks. And what they do, they provide connectivity services, and they also provide cloud hosting services. And our library community supports development of open access repositories and journals. And that seemed like a perfect fit for us because RANs were working on the connectivity and clouds and infrastructure side, and libraries had experience with open access support in the institutions and countries. And we prepared those principles for Unesco, because this year UNESCO discusses open science recommendations. And we stressed two areas which are really important to progress with developments in scholarly communication, but also I think in digital humanities. So the first one is Africa-led and operated open infrastructures, because as we heard yesterday and today, it's really the best when Africans who understand local specifics manage and run infrastructures. It's not someone from abroad who doesn't understand what's going on in the countries and in institutions. And it's really important to value indigenous and traditional knowledge, which is unfortunately still underrepresented in scholarly communication system. And with this statement, we try to address inequality, which unfortunately still exists in African universities, and support equity, diversity, and social justice. So we feel it's really important that African researchers actively engage in defining and implementing open access and open science on the continent, but also globally. It shouldn't be the global north driving all those discussions. And I'm glad to see that more and more researchers are getting engaged in those discussions. And it's really important to shift focus towards equitable, global, long-term, non-commercial, open source if possible, scalable and sustainable transformation of scholarly publishing. And we see that by enabling and promoting local infrastructures. And I don't think there is a single country left in Africa which wouldn't have an open access repository, either on the institutional level or on the national level. So there is already infrastructure there. There are skilled librarians who are able to provide support. Of course, digital humanities is still a new topic in many libraries, but we started discussing how librarians could be better trained on providing support to digital humanists. And we also see as a path to sustainability, collaborative community-based models and open public infrastructures, because it's not really sustainable to leave everything in the hands of big multinational commercial companies that wouldn't care for local needs. And local solutions are really important. And for us, that's the way to long-term sustainability. And we drafted those principles to commit to running infrastructures which are led by African research community, which are owned by African research community, which are open, hosted and operated in Africa, governed by African researchers, and they ensure diversity, inclusivity, and multilinguality. As we heard yesterday, unfortunately, that's still an issue with a lot of commercial companies. And for us, the way forward is collaborative open access publishing, and that's what Brian mentioned as one of the responses to the funding question, because I believe that there are organizations in Africa already, such as NRANs, libraries, that maybe don't have funding, but they have infrastructures and skills available to support digital humanities projects. And another topic that we identified as really important one is knowledge that is really co-created with communities, because we've heard how much African literature and African research is actually rooted in storytelling, and this storytelling comes from traditional communities, and those traditional communities should also be part of research processes. And supporting local open access publishing, open access journals, other platforms is a way to ensure this respect to traditional knowledge, ensure language pluralism, and inclusivity of media and formats, as again it was mentioned today, is really important in those discussions around indigenous and traditional knowledge. And we identified some actions that universities are committing to, and also other partners. So one of them, equitable partnerships, because between all actors in this landscape, and sustainable collaborative open access publishing models, because I believe if we join forces, we can really achieve a lot. And it's really important to co-develop standards for capturing and disseminating indigenous traditional knowledge that is respectful to those traditional communities. And community university partnerships and community-based participatory research is something that should be really high on the agenda of African universities. And one of the main obstacles on this path is this traditional research assessment and evaluation system, which exists in African universities, but also in the global north. And unfortunately, this traditional system doesn't really support diversity and equality. And we believe that that's a missing one of the missing links and one of the missing steps that should happen. That universities and research organizations should really change the way they assess researchers and evaluate practices, introduce incentives, introduce services that really support and reward researchers who engage with communities in the culture of sharing, that reward diversity of outputs, not only peer-reviewed journal articles published in a bunch of international journals, publishing in local journals should be rewarded, as well as digital humanities projects should be as valuable as those peer-reviewed publications in international journals. So it's really important to capture broader impact, broader community impact, broader social impact of research. And then multilingualism and diversity is really important, because researchers should be evaluated regardless of the language in which they publish. English shouldn't be lingua franca in Africa. And journals and book publications in all languages should be part of research assessment and evaluation, and not only these journal articles. And this is one of the examples of an open access repository from University of Nairobi. And in our network, that's the largest open access repository. It includes over 100,000 records. And I just did a quick search what kind of materials they have with keyword storytelling, and I found 156 papers available there, and they look at storytelling from organizational perspective, from community perspective, and these kind of repositories could be used to disseminate research, and it's just one of the examples, and there are many others out there. And I'd like to end my talk with some highlights from UNESCO Open Science recommendations. So they're still in a draft form, and last week they were sent to 193 member states, and the process is to discuss them and adopt in November next year. And I was really glad to see that those topics of equity and diversity are deeply rooted in those recommendations, and they're supposed to be global recommendations that each country, each government would commit to. And they stress collaborative and inclusive open science. They stress importance of new actors in open science, not just traditional researchers whom we used to see. They also promote inclusion of scholarly knowledge from marginalized groups, and aim to reduce inequalities that exist and build capabilities among different actors not traditionally involved in research processes. And they stress the importance of dialogue with indigenous people and communities, and respect to traditional knowledge holders. And these recommendations include sections on open engagement of societal actors, and also openness to diversity of knowledge. And this openness of diversity of knowledge addresses richness of diverse knowledge systems, and respect for knowledge, sovereignty, governance, and recognition of rights of knowledge producers to receive fair and equitable share of benefits. And I hope these recommendations will be adopted. And I'd like to stress once again this topic of equity and inclusion that is really dear to my heart, and was also mentioned a lot these days. October is a month when there is an International Open Access Week. So it will be October 19 to 25 this year, when scholarly communication actors around the world celebrate Open Access Week. And this year's Open Access Week is open with purpose, taking action to build structural equity and inclusion. And I hope these conversations will continue, and I hope academic system in which we live will change. Of course, it will take time, but I hope with this new generation that was already mentioned in our discussions today, this change will happen a bit sooner than with us. And thanks a lot for this opportunity to share.
Thank you, Irina, for such a beautiful presentation. You have touched on many of the things that I have here as well. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes.
Loud and clear. Okay, good. So I'd like to tell us a very short story to begin with. In 2012, I took a graduate course with Professor Daniel O'Donnell titled Digital Humanities. This course got me thinking about digital humanities. Like many of you, my first question was, what is digital humanities? I know humanities is evolving, but we'll find out. And as a grad student in that class, I was supposed to write a scholarly essay. And I wanted to write something I could connect with, something that resonates with me. So I turned to my roots as usual. And I started searching on the internet for digital humanities in Nigeria, digital humanities in Africa, digital humanities in West Africa, digital humanities in Ghana. My search went on and on and on, and I found very little, next to nothing. And at that point, I decided, why not write on digital humanities in Nigeria? Write about digital humanities in Africa. Write about why we are not visible on the global scene. And I did. Fortunately for me, I was able to find an article, more like a blog or a post that Dr. Yacou had written a while ago, just about the digital evolution in the literary sphere in Nigeria. And I held on to that, like, oh, this is my saving grace. This is one thing, this is one person writing about digital humanities, kind of. And I read it over and over again. I wrote about it. I said, it's not like we're not talking, we're just not many enough. Today, sitting here and looking at the panelists and looking at the attendees, I would say, I think we're there, almost there. And this is very important because to be visible on the global scene, on the global digital humanities scene, we need critical mass. The interesting thing is, it's not that we don't have people talking about digital humanities. It's not that we don't have digital humanities projects. As we've seen at this symposium in the last couple of days, we have an abundance of people telling our stories. But the thing is, many people don't even know that the work they do falls under the umbrella of digital humanities. Many of them don't know that what they are doing crosses boundaries, crosses fields, crosses sections. And what a platform like this does, it helps to connect us all. It helps to bring us all together. I've heard many people say this over and over and over in the last couple of days. Charles said it when she talked about her archive project, that I didn't even know what I was doing had any connection or relevance to digital humanities. Bayo said it when he started. I'm not a scholar. I don't know anything about digital humanities, but this is what I do. Kaylin said it as well. I don't know anything about digital humanities, but that is the beauty about digital humanities. That is the beautiful thing. This is a field that crosses, it has a cross-boundary feature. It is a field that belongs to one and to all. It belongs to itself and it belongs to the general academic society. It encompasses different fields, including those who think of themselves as existing outside the scholarly arena. It includes all of us. And what we are doing in Africa here is we are taking part in our own storytelling. We're adding our voice to our narrative. So I know many of you, the question on your mind, as we've seen with the last question, one of the questions we had to the panelists is, how do I get involved? How do I add my voice? Is what I am doing even digital humanities? If you are thinking about that question, you are on the right path. And I have 4 things that I would for us to do, for everyone listening, for everyone who's here, for everyone who is engaging. The first thing you need to do is to reach out. And I would say by being here, you are reaching out. For everyone who's attending today, for everyone who's logged on, for everyone who's presented, in a way or another, you are reaching out. You are being a part of the community. You are being a part of that conversation. And this is very important because without you, we can't have critical mass. Without you, we can't represent ourselves. Without you, we can't tell our stories like we should. And without you, we don't have each other to lean on. So thank you all for coming. Thank you all for participating. Thank you all for showcasing your projects. Another thing I'd say is what you need to do is subscribe. We have so many groups, so represented across many platforms that are doing anything on digital humanities or technology or reshaping how we think about humanities as a literary field. I'm so happy to see Dr. Edoro here. I'm one of your many fans. I'm one of your followers on Brittle Paper. I am with you on Facebook all the time. I'm not a great Twitter fan, but I always read. I always find out what's interesting that you're talking about, that's going on. And you can be a silent follower, but you should be a follower. Since yesterday, I have subscribed to many platforms that I didn't even know existed. As it was being posted, I was following. And this is important because the conversations are happening, whether you're a part of it or not. So what you need to do is to subscribe, to be a part of this conversation, to be in the know, to know what is going on, and to think about how you can add your voice to the conversation. I would say, just being here yesterday, I have thought about so many things that I could do to add my voice to the conversation. I have thought about projects, I have thought about theories, I have had questions. And that is the importance of being here, of being a part of this community, of listening to people, of sharing ideas. The next thing I would say, the third thing is be a partaker. So many of the things I realized, because since yesterday I have been researching what is happening. And to my amazement, I found out that there have been many call for papers in the last couple of years about digital humanities in Africa. And I asked myself, how, when, and why didn't I know about all this? Things are happening. Things are happening. We're spinning the wheel. Let's not be left out. So from time to time, you will find things, but the best way to find those things is if you are connected. So it's important for you to subscribe. It's important for you to know, because many of these people will post it on their platforms. I know that since 2017, that'll be since 2015, Nigeria has gained a lot of global recognition in digital humanities. We have created, through the hard work of Dr. Okpebi, we now have the Digital Humanities Association in Nigeria existing on a WhatsApp platform. Many people don't know. If you are in Nigeria, you need to sign up on that platform. I think there's a way you can get in touch with Dr. Okpebi. Dr. Yacou would probably be posting something about that soon. Get involved, be on that platform, be a contributor. Send your papers, join Global Outlook Digital Humanities. That is it is a social interest group that is particularly interested in bridging the gap between low income and high income economies. It's actually bridging the gap between worlds. And Nigeria has been a partaker of this connection, of this bridge, because I know that many in the last couple of years, professors from Canada and US have visited Nigeria and have presented at the Digital Humanities Association in Nigeria annual conferences. but the most important outcome of that connection is many Nigerians now have been able to publish, have been able to add their voices to the development of the digital humanities conversation by leaning on these connections. It is what it is. Sometimes for us to come up, for us to go up, we have to lean on some of the established bodies that we have. And we are happy that we are bridging that gap. We are making that connection. So be a partaker, join your groups. I know that there is a group in South Africa. I know that there's one in Ghana. I know that Kenya has too. So if you haven't asked questions on how to join, and then you will have access. You might be able to have access to some of your funding inquiries. You might be able to have answers rather to some of your funding inquiries, because you can't have answers if you're not in the know. Just a couple of days ago, a friend of mine posted on one of the WhatsApp groups I'm on and said, this is a professor at Carleton University in Canada who wants to connect with a professor in West Africa in these fields. I took that post, I forwarded it to another friend. That is the importance of connection. Now we have the access opening up. We ourselves have to do the work of being involved. Then I would say, lastly, be globally visible. In 2015, when I met Dr. Okpebi, it was because he was coming for a program, for a conference here in Canada. And it was a digital humanities conference. Since then, there have been so many other conferences about digital humanities around the world. If you're thinking your work borders on digital humanities, do not hesitate to apply for these conferences. I know that there are professors in this part of the world who would say, well, it doesn't fit with us, but these are places where you can, that might be interested in this line of discussion, and they will send you in the right way. I know that in humanities, in digital humanities, we are human. We are very human. We listen and we connect people. So please let us continue to add our voice. Let us continue to tell our stories. There are many avenues through which we can do this. And you won't be able to do it if you're not visible, if you're not reaching out, if you're not subscribing, and if you're not partaking. So thank you very much for coming. Feel free to reach out to me, reach out to people, the organizers, the hosts. And I'll say again to Brian and to James, thank you so much for creating this avenue. Thank you so much for building this platform, for creating a way for us to be able to further this discussion, to tell our stories. And I would say, thank you again, everyone. Being a part of this has really gladdened my heart, and I am looking forward to future endeavors. Bye.
Thank you so much, Titi. Those were beautiful words, and all your 4 steps are all fantastic advice. And I also really liked your point that many of us are doing digital humanities, even though we don't think we are or don't realize that we are. And I think some of that maybe goes back to that funding question. Funders sometimes define what we think as digital humanities, and we may need to help those funders sort of expand what they think of as digital humanities. And Irina, that was great as well. I think about the survey that you and I did maybe 10 years ago on a survey of institutional repositories in the region. And it feels like things have developed quite a bit in terms of that infrastructure. So I have a couple questions for you both, but I also got a message from Tunde Okpebi, who wants to add some more information about the funding sources. So I'm going to turn it over to Tunde for a couple of minutes.
Thank you so much, Brian. Once again, I want to thank Brian and James. already Titi has already spoken my mind in actually expressing how grateful we are for creating this platform that African DH scholars, we can share stories and then expand the network. And I can assure you that with this kind of initiatives, definitely DH will be growing in Africa, and then we're connected with our colleagues and friends in the diaspora. Yeah, while they were talking about funding a couple of minutes ago, it just crossed my mind that I need to share some thoughts on funding, and then to encourage our colleagues and then those who may be interested in actually developing their ideas that there are opportunities to get funding, but it requires hard work, hard work. Number one, I will encourage you to create a platform where Titi has already mentioned that we need visibility. If people don't know what you are doing, there is no way they can support you. So you need to create that platform, and you need to build an international branch. Attend conferences. Of course, this will cost you personal investments. You need to spend your money sometimes. Unfortunately, here where we are, we don't really get the kind of institutional support that we need for conferences, for some of these things. So you need to invest your own money, or maybe get your friends to support you. Number two, you create a network that you can leverage on. Okay, create a network that you can leverage on. Then, of course, if you can't convince your funders with what you have done, there is no way they'll be willing to put their money in what you are doing. Okay, so it's important that you really invest and in what you are doing. Now, just a short story on how we started getting funding for our summer school. As City has mentioned, 2016, I was attending conferences. I was able to get Professor Donnell to attend the first summer school. He used his funding from a grant, and then, of course, I had to use my own money to start the first summer school with some money from one or two friends. And then it was after that we started getting some funding from Germany, because by virtue of my, my interaction, being a former scholar in Germany, and then, a Humboldt fellow, I was able to attract some funding. And then with that, we've been able to convince our funder that we can do that. Not only that, because we are interested in empowering other scholars. We're interested in raising and equipping young scholars in West Africa. So you must have that public good in your mind. If you are trying to, run any project, you must be thinking beyond yourself, beyond your personal development or personal interest. You are willing to help other scholars. You are willing to create that platform for them. Okay, in terms of co-creation, and I think Irina she had just mentioned open access. Okay, so we need to expand and let people know what we are doing, and then you help other people to get that. With that, I'm sure we begin to improve and expand, our initiatives, get more people involved, and then empower more people, and then tell more of our stories. And with the support of Brian and James, I mentioned yesterday, thanking Brian that already has accepted to give a talk during our third summer school that we are going to have in March because of the COVID. I have other colleagues from different parts of the world that have already shown interest to actually give their lectures. So these are kind of relationship we need to build across the globe, so that we can begin to tell more of our story, and then get this what we are doing out to the world. I must commend all the presenters. Just as they said, I've enjoyed myself. I've learned quite a lot from these colleagues, and I've been inspired, getting new ideas of some of the projects, that we can do, even here in Nigeria, apart from the one we are doing already. I mentioned yesterday that we just got a federal government funded project because of, what we are trying to do here. So I believe that with my colleagues who are listening, or who may likely listen later on, we need to work together. Let's connect, and then we can be of help to one another. And definitely, I know that you know, the field is just there very well. We are yet to go far in this area. In fact, we have not even tried the surface of DH in Africa. We are just starting, but I'm sure that we are moving in the right direction. We are getting there. Thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you, organizer Brian and James. We are so grateful for you for creating this platform, Titi and everyone. Thank you so much for supporting us, and I hope we'll continue this conversation and this relationship. Thank you, and you know, have a wonderful time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tundi. That was great. And we do have a just along those lines. We have a comment in the Q&A about asking about if we can have contact addresses. And so, if the presenters, panelists agree, we can. We do have a contact list of everybody who registered for this event, and we can send out the document of links that we've been compiling as the panels go on, and contact information. If panelists agree, we also hope to put online the slides. The videos will be online. And as I mentioned yesterday, you know, when Zoom, when we turn off the Zoom meeting, everyone disappears. So I know there's been a chat on Twitter that we really hope we can do this again and keep this conversation going in other forms as well. I know we're a little bit, well, we're quite a bit over time. So I just want to echo everyone, thank everybody, let you all know how inspiring this all was. I do hope we can continue this. I'd like to turn it back over to James to say a few concluding remarks and mention some other upcoming events. So thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Brian. And again, just to thank everyone for being a great part of this. I have learned so much in the last 48 hours myself. And for me, the story of this event is the story of everyone who has participated to make it work. So from our co-sponsors, from Irina to Tunde to the guys at the Kansas African Studies Center to the Idea Rich, Brian, Kaylin, and Sylvia. These are great guys to work with, and I'm so grateful that together with all the excellent speakers we've had in the last 2 days, we've been able to do something quite profound. This is the first of it, certainly not the last. I hope that when we invite you guys to come again, probably next year or sometime soon, you will agree to participate. In terms of future event, I'll just mention that we'll be having a panel on the famous Onitsha Market literary pamphlets sometime in the spring. So please be on the lookout for that. The idea is to discuss the digital afterlives of the Onitsha literary works and have librarians and a group of scholars come together to look at this amazing aspect of African popular culture and print culture more generally. And just to add that the Department of African and African American Studies here at the University of Kansas is having this amazing panel on Beyonce's Black is King. And be on the lookout for this information online. Also, we'll probably circulate it online and through other platforms. It promises to be a great one. It's part of the series of activities we are putting together as we celebrate the 50th year anniversary of the department. So that's something to keep in mind. So just to conclude, it's that time when it gets silent and awkward as people sign out of Zoom. But thank you for joining us. It's been a great 2 day of the Symposium on African Digital Storytelling, and I'm so grateful this worked out. Thanks for joining us, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.